Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Cripescast. I'm your host, Charlie Behrens. This is the podcast where we talk to people for and or from the Midwest, and we are powered by Everlight Solar. Here's today's episode. Folks, welcome back to the Cripescast. Today, my guest is Stephen Olikara. He is a friend of mine. We go back. He was on episode 14 of the Cripescast. He is now the president of Bridge Entertainment Labs, which is all about harnessing the power of culture-shifting entertainment media to sort of transform divisions in America. So essentially, he is looking for ways to use entertainment and media to, to bring people together instead of pushing them apart. I think it's a very important conversation to have these days, especially as you look at sort of things going on in America's political system right now. This election that we're having, everyone's at their throats. The Supreme Court giving all this power to presidents that frankly don't deserve the power that the Supreme Court has given them, if you want my opinion. But you look at the potential for things like that, giving so much power to one person. There's so much riding on the presidency. People just get at each other's throats more. It's kind of the recipe for disaster, unless you have people like Stephen out there who are looking for just ways to bring people together and get people talking and get people away from social media and basically just the media empires we have out there, especially as it pertains to politics, are driven toward making us angrier, making us pick teams. We love doing that in America, whether it's sports teams or whatnot. But that's what's happening to us, and it is happening to us. We're not really actively choosing this. These social media sites are designed to draw us in and keep us there longer so we can get served ads. And what keeps us there longer? It's anger, it's fear, it's anxiety, none of it good. So I think it's good to kind of break that up a little bit and take a look at ourselves and what we're doing in hopes of actually changing it. And change doesn't really start with the next president. Change really starts kind of with ourselves and really looking at ourselves and what we're doing here. So, and what we're doing currently, it's not good. So I think this is a great conversation where we can just dive into what can we do today and simple things. What simple things can we do today to kind of help the country, hopefully the world? At least I hope that's where this conversation goes. Colleen, how is that for a nice long intro into this?
I'm so proud of you. You landed the plane. You did a good job.
I mean, I went up there for a while.
You were looping around for a couple of times. You were waiting for the signal from the person at the.
I was, and I did kind of give you a glance every now and again. You seemed to be nodding your head. I don't know if those were polite nods, but
it's just
they go too long.
No, you're great. Long? I think it's not something that you can say shortly because it's such a complex thing, and shortly I don't know if it's a word, but yeah,
people know what you mean.
I think it's a complex issue that you can't really say in such few words because if you do, then you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. You know, like everybody gets super heated about this stuff. So
yeah, even family. Yeah. Man, I got family on both sides of this political situation.
Yeah,
and just hearing people just shout at each other, and it's like, what the?
Reminds me of home. It's good.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. Well, we are just people. I don't know. Is this what we've always done? Not to this degree. It's the social media stuff, man.
It's the social media stuff. I think that was I was kind of thinking about it when I was listening to the episode. I think it's just worse now because I liked what you were talking about of people just saying stuff to say stuff, like silence. It's a really good conversation you guys had. I'm glad you guys talked about it. And I think with social media, everybody feels the need to say something about everything. And that's just not the case sometimes. And I think it's okay. Just not speak up if you don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think so. And, I also bring up in this podcast, a conversation with Stephen, that I want the Cripescast to be kind of like a place sometimes we talk to comedians, entertainers. It's not always like political issues because who the hell would listen to it?
No one.
If it was, I wouldn't. But sometimes I think it is good to talk about these things. But I do kind of want to live in this place in the middle that feels like less and less people are occupying. And by that, I don't mean that, my beliefs on every political issue are right in the middle. That's very far from true. I feel very strongly on certain things and strongly on other things. But I think being able to have the conversation and getting people to listen just has to say that both sides are being acknowledged and understand where people are really coming from. Because sometimes you could be like, how can you like this guy? He's a total fascist. Or how can you like this guy? He's a socialist. If you start with that, then there's really no place to start. So it's just like, it's not the fact that you like this person. It's more the question of why do you like this person? Like, what is it? And in asking the question why, I feel like we can just, as people, understand each other more. And so I would just encourage everybody when they're having political conversations in this political year to just, instead of jumping to what your opinion is, which could be good, could not be good, could be informed, could not be informed. Maybe just say why. And the more information you gather about why people feel the way they feel, I think the better you be able to understand how to change their mind if changing their mind is something you want to do. Or maybe you understand what they want and say, you can have this, but you can have this without fascism as well.
Yeah, so, I think what you said in the podcast about like keep on asking why, I was thinking about it. I was like, oh, it's kind of like when someone's like, why dad? Why mom? Like you keep on asking why and that can be annoying. But I think the way that you positioned it in the podcast is like asking questions that like get you to the why. And also too, I think like going into conversations, I think, especially the last election and the election before, like people are stuck in their ways. And so I think people probably have to go into conversations in a more curious mindset rather than persuasive because people are kind of stuck. And so it's like, if you're actually going to have these conversations, be like okay with the possibility that you're not going to change people's opinions. And if you're actually curious and like want to know what's going on rather than trying to like push your agenda. I think like if I were to get approached about like someone being like, Chicago is better than Wisconsin or Illinois is better than Wisconsin, and they're trying to change my perspective and they just keep on saying this stuff, I'm going to get even farther in what I already believe.
Yeah. We just keep digging it in. Yeah, it's human nature to get, if you're getting attacked, to kind of get defensive,
Yeah.
And because also the way people, like we're a lot of fixers. You tell me this sometimes at work, like, Charlie, you're a fixer. And that's true. I want the problem to be just solved. And then I want everybody away from, you know what I mean?
In the issues of life, you are the Midwest fixer, where if you can just do WD-40 or duct tape to figure it out, like that's what you will do. And sometimes WD-40 and duct tape don't solve things.
I know they don't.
With love and respect and admiration, of course.
First of all, I use more tools than that. And if it still isn't working, I just tear the whole thing down and start again. But it just doesn't, you can't tear, things down in society. It just doesn't work that way. So I think it's just understanding you can't fix something with one conversation with somebody where it's not going the way you think it's going. Over time, it'll work. Continuing to pour love on this gasoline shit fire we have in America. That's more of the hope that we have. But the vitriol and continuing to turn to cable news that is pretty much engineered to get you pissed and get you watching their dumb ads so they make money. And the same with social media. That's just not the way to go. Anyways.
Well, on lighter news, how was your fishing week? Did you get any fish?
Fishing was great. My dad got a muskie, and I've never seen him smile like that before, ever in my life.
Are muskies like the hardest fish to get?
Yeah. It's the fish at 10,000 casts. And my dad had the biggest smile on his face. I was like, oh my gosh, wow. That is, I don't think I've ever seen it, but It was really fun to see. Good for him.
That's nice.
Yeah, it really was. I mean, he was thrilled. I got myself, I got a fair number. I got some multi-species action this past week, not to brag. A lot of nice crappies, walleye, pike, largemouth, no smallmouth, bluegill, perch, no muskies, but a lot of fun fish. It was nice. And it's just nice to get out there and just forget about, things for a while and just, when you go fishing, it's like adding slack to your fishing line when you get a knot in it. You get a knot in your fishing line, you don't want to pull tight. I feel like in life sometimes we're pulling tight. You want to let some slack in there. You want to let it breathe. Then you can slowly unwind the knots of your mind. Yeah. Put that in a bad
coffee
book
table
somewhere.
book. Yeah. Put that on a piece of board or a piece of plywood. And Midwestern moms across the nation will put that in their lake homes.
It's probably a little too long. You having fun back in, where are you, Minneapolis?
I'm in Minnesota right now. Yeah, we were like 10 miles from you when we were on vacation. Too close for comfort. But it was very nice. We had some time up with the family. And then now I'm at my parents' house and we got this on the way into town, some Barron's Old Fashioned Brandy, because I'm in charge of the 4th of July cocktail. So
I love it.
Yes.
I love it. This is what we call an advertisement, folks, right in the top. If you want to get some Barron's Old Fashioned Brandy for your cookout this 4th of July, check it out, barronsoldfashionedbrandy.com, or just go to any store in Wisconsin. Otherwise, you can order it.
But yeah,
well, that's great. Well, I hope you guys have a wonderful 4th. You gonna watch fireworks? Gonna light them off?
Well, it's actually growing up, we don't have the same fireworks that you guys do. Minnesota's pretty strict about it. So you guys get to have more fun. We don't.
Yeah, you can go buy tannerite at at an adult film store off the highway if you really want to.
And that's America.
That is America.
That's isn't it? We used to always go to I think Hudson or just right over the border because I'm only an hour from the border, and we used to always do that. And I don't know if I ever told you this story, but we were younger. We used to live in a cul-de-sac that was across the street from it was a pond, but it was pretty much sewage, essentially, nothing lived in it type stuff.
Yeah.
And so our neighbor, our little 6 houses.
Retention pond.
Yeah. Our 6 houses in our cul-de-sac.
Wasn't sewage. It was probably sewer, unless it was actual sewage.
It didn't smell like shit, so I don't think.
Okay.
I don't think so.
It's like runoff water.
We got told that someone died in it, which I don't think was true, but I think it was more so that our parents made sure we didn't go in it.
Oh yeah, yeah. Isn't it funny the stuff you're told that you never question until you're older and you're like, what the? That wasn't sewage.
Yeah, it wasn't I don't even know what it was. I just was in my head I heard sewer and I was like, sewage, poop, no. And then
oh yeah,
we would hit golf balls into it all the time. It's not a great place. All that to say. But we used to do fireworks, the cul-de-sac, and we would go buy the fireworks in Wisconsin and do illegal activities. And this was, and you probably would hate me at this age. This was probably 3rd, 4th grade, and we bought the nice, good fireworks that would make the real ones. And
why would I hate you as a 3rd, 4th grader?
Just wait.
Okay.
And so the police got called on us. They come, and my family from Chicago's there, and we have a whole group, and we're putting off stuff, and the police was like, all right, guys, you can't do this, whatever. And so then they take some of the fireworks, and I, being a upstanding citizen, 4th grader, committed to the DARE program and telling the truth, I go, officer, what about these over here that my whole family hid so that we could still have fun?
Oh my God.
And
you ratted him.
I didn't know. I wanted to be like a law-abiding citizen. I wanted so to this day, my whole family like holds that resentment against me that is who I'm saying you would hate, because I was like, excuse me, officer, what about these?
Coco the narc.
At that time I was leany still, but yeah, that was when I would like ratted us all out, and then my cousins were so pissed at me, and but yeah, we got to do Roman candles. It was fine. Like, we're cool.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations. I hope you get reminded of that by
Every
at least
year.
half your family.
Yeah.
This year. For the 4th
Yeah.
of
So
July.
that's probably the extent of what we'll be doing, is like maybe illegal fireworks or I don't know. We don't really have a ton of
Wonderful.
plans. Yeah.
Well, folks, as you are dealing with the fireworks this weekend, be safe. Don't shoot your eye out, and have fun. And actually, you know what? This conversation with Stephen, very appropriate for the 4th of July, because it's have some, listen to it. Maybe bring it to your 4th of July celebrations. Maybe if you're gonna, I would recommend zero political conversations if you can, have fun. But if they do come up, maybe here's a good way to approach them.
Just good reminder, we're all American.
We are all American, except the ones who aren't. We got to get them out. Get them the fuck out of here. Yeah. And folks, of course, before we get to the podcast, I want to just remind you, we are still raising money for Doctors Without Borders. They're doing incredible work in the Middle East. You can check them out, doctorswithoutborders.org, or you can follow them at Doctors Without Borders. And with that, here is my conversation with Stephen. Thanks for coming in, man.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Second appearance on the Cripescast.
Yes.
And a lot's changed with you since. So kind of like catch us up.
Yes. Well, I think the last time I was on was just as the podcast was getting off the ground in 2020, I think. So we're in the middle of the pandemic.
Yeah.
And it's wild to think that was maybe 4 years ago.
I know. Time flies. Holy smokes. It is crazy.
Yeah.
But since then, you've gone from sort of focusing on getting millennials engaged in politics,
Right.
To now you're looking more at civility in politics.
Yeah.
And kind of bringing that back into, which I think is incredibly important, given the fact that we are in kind of a post-truth, full-on anger mode when it comes to what people see on TV.
Right.
But when you talk to people in person, most of them are like, I don't know why these guys, why are these our options?
Yeah.
In this political, another election with this option. Really?
Yeah.
We can't do better than this. So
Yeah.
I think there's like this gap between sort of what people want and what the American political system has created.
Yeah.
And I think part of that creation is because the extremes get the most attention.
Right.
Social media bubbles have caused a lot of people to go down rabbit holes and sort of positively reinforce conspiracies or anger or whatever. All these social media things, they just feed off anger.
Right.
And they don't feed off of like the kind of balanced, centrist, work across the aisle, we're all on the same team, even though we may disagree politically.
Right.
And so anyway, catch us up on the
Yes.
specifics of your work. Who have you been working with, and when did this start for you?
Yes. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. And it's great to see this studio too. Congrats on pretty cool studio. And I see the Packers jerseys. And among the updates since I last came on is I officially became a Packers shareholder.
Dude,
went to the meeting.
Yeah, you went to the meeting.
Went to the meeting, stuck through the end of the audit committee update, where at that point most people have left the stadium.
You're like, I get a beer now.
Absolutely, absolutely, it was worth it. And but yeah, to your point, I've seen these trends in our democracy, and they're unsustainable in terms of the level of vitriol, the toxic polarization. Now, 2/3 of Americans see people of the other side as being not just different, but evil.
Yeah.
And that's not a culture in which a diverse democracy can exist or thrive. And so I've worked over the years on helping leaders work together across lines of difference, including the political aisle, which I know it sounds radical, like how do you get these people to work together? But the reality is exactly what you said, Charlie, which is when you're talking in person and have the opportunity to listen and see the humanity in another person, you surprisingly have a lot of areas of common ground. And so it's about how do you create that conversation. And I realized a few years ago that we have an intense need to scale up that kind of conversation. It happens in so many isolated ways around the country, including here in Wisconsin. But how do you scale that up? And that, I believe, happens through culture. It happens through storytelling. Entertainment is a huge part of that. And that's why I'm now leading a group called Bridge Entertainment Labs to do that. I'm working with Arnold Schwarzenegger's Policy Institute called the Schwarzenegger Institute as a senior fellow to do that as well. And it's trying to find ways that we can elevate what you and I might call like Midwest nice to a higher level of consciousness in our country.
Yeah. And what roadblocks are you coming into? What roadblocks are you facing? Who are the people that are standing in the way, and what do they stand to gain by standing in the way of sort of civility in politics?
Well, you pointed to a lot of them in terms of how social media works, and we're in these echo chambers. And the truth is that division is profitable. There is what I call an outrage industrial complex that makes a ton of money when they're sending you messages on social or email, now increasingly on text message. Maybe you get hit up with those mass texts. And it's meant to scare you, and it's meant to make you feel alarmed and angry. And when you do that, the system profits, because either they're directly getting your money, or at the very least, they're getting your eyeballs and your attention. And so that's at the root of the problem right now. And meanwhile, you have politicians and political parties and political media pundits who know that if you feed into that division, you're going to get more traction. And as someone who's been on all the major cable news outlets, I can tell you, whether it's CNN, MSNBC, or Fox News, you have to play into that. Otherwise, you're not getting called back. And so it's going to take a group of people, what I call the exhausted majority, to combat that system and change the incentives. And you can change political incentives, which I've worked many years on, that is dealing with the money in politics and opening up the primary system, because to your point, the extremes do take up the oxygen by design. Or and on top of those political incentive changes, there's also the cultural piece. Do we see portrayals of leaders or citizens listening to people who they disagree with? And we saw an interesting example this past spring. There's this movie called Civil War. I think you've heard of it.
Yeah.
And it depicts a second American Civil War, where you have a few states that have seceded, and they're going up against, in the movie, they portray a third-term American president. And
what president would ever suggest running for a third term?
I don't know where they got that idea from.
Wow. Interesting.
But, the director, Alex Garland, he is the son of journalists. And so for folks who haven't seen it, the movie is through the lens of American journalists who are going from New York to DC and witnessing the horrifying scenes along the way. But the interesting thing from that is the cast, who I had the opportunity to meet with and advise and share some solutions to polarization as they were about to go on their global press tour, was, one of the actors, for example, Wagner Moura. He said, I realized through filming this movie, how important it is to be listening to people whom I disagree with. And Nick Offerman, who plays that third-term president, spoke to that as well, that we need to be having real conversations now. And so I think even the cast members who were not politically oriented or active before the movie, were not concerned day to day with issues of polarization, they saw that this is a real threat to our country, and they want to be a part of the solution. So more of that, more where you have cultural influencers who are modeling what healthy conversation and healthy disagreement can look like.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really cool. That's certainly something that I try to do here, actually, on this podcast.
Yeah.
I don't know that I always succeed, and there's a lot of temptations. Like, you got Trump, saying that Milwaukee's a horrible city, for instance. I mean, you hear something like that, and part of me is like, I want to combat that by, saying something about that says you don't know Milwaukee.
Yeah.
Every time you come here, it's in an armored vehicle. You go to some place to either gain money or push, your politics, and then you leave. What do you even know about Milwaukee?
Right.
But it's like, what is even the point of that? I mean, is that just another proxy war for like anger? And is that just like say, because he'll say, I never said it, and the people who want to believe him will believe him. The people who don't want to believe him won't believe him. And so, I mean, but how do you have real conversations about these things when truth is so far from something that people value?
Right.
In a lot of ways. And I think you brought this up with cable news. As soon as Fox News became Fox News, and I'm just using Fox News not because it's on the right, but because Fox News was the first news station to say, we're going all in on, we are a right-leaning organization,
right?
Which then brought on hard left-leaning, MSNBC and all that. And I feel like the more technology has progressed, the more we become polarized.
Right.
And I think that one thing we have to do is, look at these social media platforms and figure out, is there a way to realistically get these social media organizations that benefit off of political polarization to say, this isn't good, we won't do it? Is there any way to hold them accountable?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the most promising solutions that I see, and I talked about this actually when I ran for office here in Wisconsin, was the importance of not regulating speech, which is often where the controversy comes from around this conversation. Is regulating the algorithms, because the way the social media companies express themselves and tip the scales in favor of outrage, like I got to share and kind of peel the curtain back a little bit on this Trump Milwaukee is horrible story. It's an example of how the outraged industrial complex works, and I think it's wrong that he made that comment, and I don't doubt that he did. The journalist who picked up on that, a guy named Jake Sherman, who works for an organization called Punchbowl News. I've known Jake. He was the one who was sourced for all the stories that went nationally. He wasn't in the room. He was using sources that were in the room, but he knew that particular quote without any context on what was really said will travel far and wide. And the social media companies and their algorithm are obviously emphasizing a story like that, even when none of us who are in the room don't really know the context of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do think that we need to make these algorithms more neutral, essentially. And there are ways that you could do this. So, for example, on X right now, you have the two feeds. You have the For You feed, and then you have the normal feed that comes out chronologically. And I, as someone who's aware of all of these forces, still often click on the For You because it's hitting your it's unleashing this dopamine rush in your head so often. It's hard to not be in the For You feed. But that's a really good example of, you have the algorithm emphasized on one side and more neutral on the other side. But if you have a more neutral algorithm, I think you take some of the outrage out of the conversation.
Yeah. But we are a people.
Yeah.
And the social media giants are run by people and algorithm and robots, kind of. So, but we are in a society that's profit driven.
Yeah.
And people create profit by going down the anger rabbit hole. So people are going to be people. Business is going to be business.
Yeah.
And what's going to stand in the way?
One interesting trend I'm seeing is, you mentioned the cable news companies, all of them are losing viewership right now. Like on a good day. So one of the reasons why I'm working actually more on entertainment is because I'm looking at the trends. I see that on a good night, maybe CNN has 1 million viewers, which is not close to what it used to be. if you look at the longer term trends, all three major cable news outlets are you losing a ton of their viewership, and just the money is not there and the eyeballs are not there. And I think part of it is because people are getting so exhausted. So if you are constantly in this cycle of, to me, it's like, it's no different than like a drug addiction. Like you get this like short-term high, but eventually there's going to be a crash. And that crash can manifest itself in a number of different ways. And people, as a result, are having an increase in mental health issues, and you're seeing just an exhaustion. And that is starting to reflect in the ratings as well. And so now there's a need for media entrepreneurs to be entering into this space and saying, how can I deliver a better product that is entertaining and useful to people and find a way to attract more viewers? And I think that's very possible. Now, to your point, with the social media, you're definitely playing on human emotions, and that has to be profit driven as well. So totally understand that. But I think that each of us who use these tools can make a choice of how we want to use them. I once had the honor of having a conversation with Dr. King's eldest son at a conference that my last organization was hosting. And one of the questions that's always been on my mind as I learned about Dr. King's history was, how would he be showing up today as a leader and as an activist? Would he be using social media? Would he be online all the time, or would he not be? And so I finally got the chance to pose this question to his eldest son, Martin Luther King III. And he said, my father would be using the modalities available to him to spread messages of love and justice. So it was always about getting the message out to people and using the tools available for that. And so I do think there is a choice that each of us can make to use these tools in the right way and dramatize it. That was a big thing that Dr. King and John Lewis and these major civil rights heroes did, is they dramatized these stories to force people's attention on the things that matter. And I think we have the opportunity to do that ourselves today.
Yeah, it is definitely, it's tough. You need a lot of critical thinking for a lot of people who are having a hard time just working. The keeping up with inflation, all that, just putting food on the table, things are costing more, all that sort of stuff. So it's hard to get people to kind of get themselves in a good position to then think, okay, how can I give back to society? I think that's one element of it. But then on top of that, let's say you are in a good place, and let's say you do want to contribute positively to society. Would the solution be getting on these social media platforms and sort of educating yourself from various different sources, and what you put out, what you retweet, what you tweet, or whatever the hell it is, what you put on any of your social media platforms? I mean, so is it really just up to the people to make this world a better place?
Yes. Radical concept. This is one of my favorite easy solutions that everyone at home can utilize right now, which is in the same way that you want to eat a healthy diet and diversify your diet. So you don't, as much as we would want to, we don't want to eat a brat every single day, right? And I know I'm...
Speak for yourself. No. I see what you're saying.
And I know you're not the right audience for that message.
Yeah, find another analogy on the Cripescast, all right?
I just had the chance to officiate a buddy's wedding in Madison. And during one of the speeches, they shared how they have brat Mondays. They have brats for dinner every Monday. And, there's something to that. But the point being, you don't want to have brats and candy or other food that could be bad for your system on a daily basis. It's, of course, okay to have it once in a while. And so the message is to diversify your diet. And the same exact thing applies to your personal media intake. You want to diversify your media diet. And that is something we have the power to do every single day. And what that means is that you want to follow a variety of news sources, not just on the left, right, and center, but another key distinction is establishment versus more independent sources. So, for example, and it doesn't mean that you're tuning into news that you agree with all the time. But for example, if you're reading the New York Times every day, you might want to tune into and hear what people on the Joe Rogan podcast are saying. Or if you're looking for a conservative commentator, someone like David French is really interesting to listen to. They're probably, if you're finding a way to, hear what, Jimmy Kimmel might be saying on an evening monologue, and maybe you hear a few things that Ben Shapiro is saying, that's a diverse media diet right there. And similarly with your social media, you follow a number of different outlets. So diversify your media diet is the main message there. And that's one way that you can combat the polarization system and take this into your own hands.
So you've mentioned a few people that you would recommend listening to diversify your media diet.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any organizations sort of in the middle, those independent journalism? Because it would be great to get your sort of sign off being an expert in these. Because I feel like a lot of people, they're like, okay, great. I'd like to find great local news organizations, but how do I know if what I'm reading, if these are an actual good organization? Do you just have a few organizations in the middle that you can point people to?
Yeah, I'll share two, and then I'll make a broader point after that. So the two that are really cutting against the grain to, I think, present more fair combination of perspectives. One is called allsides.com, which is an organization in the space that I come from, the depolarization space, and they're providing news from these different perspectives and helping aggregate these different perspectives as well. So kind of what you're reading before you read it. The second is, it's so interesting. I've seen a number of these former anchors on CNN or other major news outlets who become sort of like reformed. And one really good example is Jessica Yellen, the former CNN anchor at the White House. She now has a great effort called News Not Noise that you can follow. I think they're primarily on Instagram. And then one other that I'd point to is a cable news outlet that's now like the fourth largest cable news outlet. They're growing very quickly. It's called News Nation.
News Nation, yeah.
Yeah. And for me, in the last couple of years, I've sought to kind of walk and be appearing on media outlets that I think are more part of the solution. And so I've done a number of appearances on News Nation. And the thing I can confidently say, having now been on a bunch of different outlets, is that with News Nation, they were not trying to advance a narrative. They were trying to advance a healthy discussion, and they were okay with nuance. Like I went on once and we were talking about President Biden's student debt plan last year. And I was coming on as the, former Democratic, politician or whatever. And I said something that was complimentary of President Biden in terms of the value of that student debt relief proposal. But I also critiqued an aspect of it, which led to it going to the Supreme Court and not really creating the change that we wanted it to. In other words, some of that change should happen through the legislative branch as opposed to the executive branch. Mm-hmm. And so we go off the air, and I knew I was probably going to hear it from a few people that I just gave a nuanced, honest perspective, which, by the way, very radical to do in the national media. And some people did crack some jokes at me like, wait, you're here supposed to be the Democrat here and you're critiquing Joe Biden. And I said, yeah, I'm just saying what I think is honestly true and that I think is important for people at home to be aware of. And to their credit, they invited me back on and many times after that. And so I'm just trying to give a little bit of the behind the scenes for people of how the system works. And that News Nation, I think, is another really interesting one for people to tune into.
Well, that's great. And then what was kind of your broader point? You said you want to make a broader point as well.
Yeah, well, I'll just say that the broader point is that there's a reason why there are only a few of them that I can point to. Mm-hmm. And the truth is that most outlets are operating under the current incentives that they have as opposed to trying to challenge them. And by the way, that's just human nature. It's usually easier to go down the convenient path as opposed to the less convenient one. But the way that you can combat that is just, I'm not anti hyper partisan news either, right? I just choose to tune into those, but then balance that with others. And so I'm not saying listen to News Nation all day, although it would be good to introduce that to your diet, I believe. But, just try and get a combination of those out there. And hopefully for any entrepreneurs who are tuning in, they are looking for ways to be a part of this. And by the way, you're a media entrepreneur yourself. I'm curious, if you have thoughts on how to kind of cut through with more positive messages, because you've done that.
Well, I've tried. This podcast is definitely, look, it's not the sexiest podcast in the world. I know that.
I beg to differ. You've got a Charlie Barron's Packers jersey back there.
Yeah,
and,
I know.
And this Barron's branded brandy.
Yeah, there you go. By the way, if you want a little swig of that.
I don't know. Has it been? Okay.
It's been opened.
Okay.
It's been cracked. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Can we?
Yeah, you want a little
let's do it.
yeah,
let's do a little. Yeah.
There you go. There's
yeah,
that's just a nice little snort
you
for you to have there. Here,
let's do it.
I'll have some too. There you go.
We're close to
Cheers.
Happy hour. All right.
Yeah.
Cheers, buddy. All
Yeah.
right.
Folks, the Cripescast is presented and powered by Everlight Solar, the #1 option for solar energy in the Midwest. Everlight Solar. Check out how Everlight Solar can work for you by calling or going to everlightsolar.com today to book your free consultation. Cripes Inc., this place, the studio. We've been powered by Everlight Solar for a few years now, and I got to tell you, it is awesome. It's awesome to, have your lights work and then look at your energy bill, and it's pretty much nothing. It's just very cool. It's cool to see how you can harness the power of the sun, help the planet, help your pocketbook. Check them out, everlightsolar.com. And folks, I got to tell you, Fleet Farm's annual Kids Fishing Day is Saturday, July 13th from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. It's hands-on learning event, completely free. It's open to kids all ages and experiences and levels. The kids will participate in lessons, fishing lessons. They'll be taught all things fishing safety, how to use specific gear, and even how to identify different types of fish. Plus, kids are going to be able to bring home their very own free tackle box. That's pretty cool. You guys check it out. Bring your kids out and just grow the next generation of anglers across the Midwest at Fleet Farm's free Kids Fishing Day, Saturday, July 13th. Learn more at fleetfarm.com/events.
Why do I want to go to that?
I know. It sounds pretty awesome.
What's the age limit?
You're too old.
I'm a kid at heart.
Yeah. We just send Billy Deuce there dressed up as a kid. See if he can get in.
We sent Billy Deuce from the Father-Son Mall of America, like that vibe.
And folks, I got to tell you, we got brandy bottles. If you buy 3 Barron's Old Fashioned brandies, shipping is free. Just go to barronsoldfashionedbrandy.com. And we've got all the Midwest merch you can handle on cripescast.com. Click on the merch section. We've got hoodies, we've got cribbage boards, we've got hats. So much of this stuff is made in the USA. We've got fishing lures. Speaking of fishing, check it out, manitowocminute.com. And also you can get tour dates there. And Colleen has a little bit more.
All of our Keep Her Moving items are on sale for the 4th of July weekend, starting on the 3rd all the way through the 8th. Go get your Keep Her Moving merch on sale. There's no specific 15% off or whatever. It's just there's all of our Keep Her Moving items are on sale. They're made in the USA. We want to honor that made in the USA stuff that we do. It's super important. And so, yeah, that's the sale that's going on this weekend.
Awesome. Well, there you have it, folks. And now it's time to get back to my conversation with Stephen Olikara.
Anna actually has a question while we're breaking here. Hannah Milos, ladies and gentlemen, by the way, edits all these podcasts, does a hell of a job. Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Wow. So I've heard of this. It's called Ad Fontes Media Bias Chart. And it's do you know what this is? It's like a graph. And it kind of rates different media outlets based on there's 2 axes, and one is reliability and how accurate the news that they're reporting is, and then the other axis is left leaning or right leaning. Have you
not super familiar with that?
Okay, well, I was going to ask if it was a good resource for people to look into if they're looking to diversify their media intake.
I've seen some resources that are similar to that. And absolutely, the main idea is that you know what the bias is before you read that outlet. You know what the angle is going to be. And, I was just listening to NPR the other day, a couple of days ago, and you think NPR is a, national public radio, and that the reporting would be pretty down the middle. But I was hearing them put some spin on some stories. Really, they were describing one organization that I'm familiar with as something that it wasn't. And they were kind of taking some of the humanity out of what I thought that organization was. And so the point being that if you just understand where these outlets are on a kind of spectrum like that, then you know what you're getting, and then you know how to balance that as well. And you know what their agenda might be and what feelings they might be trying to evoke in you. So I think that's definitely helpful.
And then to just answer the question you were asking me with like trying to create, thanks for that question, by the way, Hannah.
Yeah, great question.
The idea of creating this podcast, for instance, I've certainly tried to focus on issues, not like politics. And I hope that, over time, people view it as a place that they can go to get informed on these various issues. I'm not trying to make it the funniest podcast in the world. I'm not trying to make it like the sexiest podcast in the world, but I am trying to give people information that they can take and have it be part of like their media diet. Now, the other side of that is like, it's not hitting those triggers in people as much. Like if I went super far down one path and was like, this is the way to feel on this issue, it might get bigger numbers. So I'm trying to live in this area in the middle intentionally, hoping that this is kind of like a bridge where whatever side of the political aisle you're on, you can at least ingest this information.
Right.
And I'm trying to use my journalism skills or training or whatever to just get information across. But I think we'll see over time. I think it's going to take a lot of things like this. I don't think one media outlet, I'll take mine as an example, that sits in the middle is going to be enough to, and by sits in the middle, I just mean tries to not have a slant. Or if I have a bias, I try to come out with it.
Yeah.
But, trying to find places where information can be consumed, I think is going to take a lot of people, going into issues that they care about and honestly presenting them and having honest conversations with other people and sharing things that are just delivering facts about a certain topic. It's a hard thing to do as a consumer.
Yeah.
It's a hard, because you don't have that knee-jerk reaction of, oh my gosh, I've got to share this with this person because it's not this is definitive. It's like we are all in this gray area and we're just trying to bring facts and information to be king again and not entertainment.
Right.
Not entertainment, but not rage.
Right.
And not hard bias.
Yeah.
Because at the end, I'm trying to seek out as much truth as possible and just let people do with that truth what they will.
Right.
As opposed to trying to influence, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you made a really important distinction when you talk about being sort of in the center and down the middle, not ideologically. That's not, I think, what you're saying. You're saying that you want to create a space where information from different perspectives can be shared. And I highlight that distinction because too often we describe someone who wants to be a bridge builder, someone who wants to have conversation across difference, as someone who doesn't have views, someone who doesn't have principles. And I think that couldn't be further than the truth. A strong bridge builder is someone who is bringing their full life story to the table and has the humility to listen to someone else's. And you and I both share music as a passion.
Yes.
And the best metaphor that I could share here is when I was first learning how to play jazz music, I went to the Conservatory of Music here. And on the first day of jazz camp, the guy says, put your instruments away, because the number one skill in playing jazz music is listening. And we spent the entire first session listening to John Coltrane and Miles Davis and Oscar Peterson and all the greats. And so when I played in groups like that, and I played in my other bands around here in Milwaukee, you realize that it's about listening. It's about a call and response. It's about bringing your story, but you want to hear others as well and put your original take. When you're riffing back and forth on it, that's what a call and response truly is. And finally, it's about being fully present in conversations. Like jazz is an improvised art form. And so if you're not fully present, you're going to be, you're not going to be contributing to the conversation on stage. You're going to be somewhere else. And so I share that as 3 parts for people to think about how to be a bridge builder in your own life, not just in politics, but in any, in your daily lifestyle.
Yeah, I that's a great analogy, Jazz, and the idea of listening. And I think too, the thing that social media likes to do is sort of you brought up Dr. King, bring up Martin Luther King's words. I think it's Martin Luther King. It's always there with his image. I don't know if he said it, but silence is violence, kind of thing. And I think that gets pushed out anytime there's like a major world or social conflict. If you're not, excuse me, if you're not saying something, you are part of the problem.
Right.
But I think in this social media landscape that we're now in, silence may have been violence back in the 60s, when not everybody had an instrument. And by instrument, I mean a social media account where they can just fire it off. So many people are not listening. They're almost going from one trending outrage to the next,
right,
playing their freaking instrument, not listening, not pulling back, not observing the larger landscape of, are you winning this game of chess, or are you just a pawn in somebody else's game? And so I think that is that. I'm not saying don't say something on an issue that you believe is important, but I think what I am saying is don't do it for the social media clout or to, just piss off your neighbor who doesn't like a flag that you're flying in your yard or whatever. Do it to really have an honest and humble look at what's true and how you can perpetuate truth in this world.
Well said.
I think.
Yeah, well said. I think that's very wise. I think this is a time for people to make their voices heard, to be participating and sharing your views on topics. And the distinction we're making here is that you want to be rooted in your convictions and be rooted in a curiosity about how other people are thinking and living your life. And do that, if no other reasons, for self-interest. The self-interest of wanting to make a stronger argument, of wanting to make real change in your community, as opposed to just being a kind of a selectivist who's just putting something out and not moving the needle on an issue. You make real change by building coalitions in this country. You don't make change by just being by yourself and being, preaching to the choir in your echo chamber. And by the way, a third reason for operating in this way that often does not get talked about is for your own health. The psychologists have found that you will show up healthier every single day if you're not harboring this rage and anger against your fellow human beings on a daily basis. If you're coming with an approach of grace and understanding and curiosity, you're going to be happier every day and probably live a longer life. So for no other reason, do it for those reasons. And to go back to the musical metaphor, the most inclusive spaces I've ever felt were in my bands, whether it was a rock band, a funk band, or a hip hop band, or my folk band, or a jazz group. It was people who genuinely had empathy, people who genuinely wanted to hear each other's stories, who who truly could see you and hear you at the same time. And because you create that kind of open and inclusive space, the music and the art you're creating was so much better, because it's like a 1 + 1 = 3 kind of dynamic. When you're truly kind of jiving and jamming together in that open mindset, you're reaching a new plateau. So to use a football analogy here, it's not about meeting.
That's good. Go right from music to football. I could feel all the people who don't like music or don't play music being like, can I just get a football analogy for this thing?
Let's get that one in there. It's not about meeting on the 50-yard line. It's about meeting on a new playing field. You know, so
like a baseball diamond, or
you could meet on a baseball diamond, soccer field, wherever you might meet. But the point being is that, because you made this point really well, that like this podcast is not ideologically centrist, I think is what you were trying to say. And so that's what the 50-yard line would be. Look, there might be some good solutions at the 50-yard line, but a lot of Dr. King's solutions were initially seen as very radical. That might have been way off on one side or the other. And the key, though, is to build in his case, a multiracial, multi-generational kind of coalition for change. And that's an evolutionary process. So it's not about this kind of transactional kind of give and take, and you wind up at the 50-yard line with some solution that no one likes. It's about listening and having an evolution of thought that meets on that soccer field or that baseball diamond.
Yeah. And, I appreciate what you like. I think people who listen to this podcast know that ideologically, there's a lot of issues. Maybe I lean one way or another on, but my point isn't even to drive my ideology home. It's just to seek more facts for people to listen to and make their own decision. Like, I'm not here to tell you one way or another. I don't think that people listen to that in an effective way.
Right.
And I think just getting information out there is maybe the most effective way to, over time, bring about actual change, I hope. But I don't know. So, I mean, I go through spurts of being hopeful, and then a little bit, like, oh gosh, how are we going to do this with all of the finance up against truth, with all of, the social media wave. And now, you kind of have like, it's only getting more advanced technology. Yeah. And we've seen that as technology grows. I feel like Midwest Nice it's an inverse relationship.
Yeah.
As technology progresses more and more, like people meeting face to face, people picking up the phone and calling. You ever get a text message and you're like, oh, to hell with this guy, but if they would have called and said, yeah, man, sure. Or just sure.
Exactly.
Yeah, sure. As opposed to sure.
Right.
And so I think
Did this happen recently for you?
Oh, it happens all the time. It happens all the time, especially with text messaging, is people or emails. People are reading an email or a text message from their place of their most insecurity. And so therefore they will attribute kind of maybe their worst case scenario in their mind or how they're feeling in that moment onto the words you put on paper. So I think anytime you can call somebody and have a conversation as opposed to text with them or, blast something on social media. And then also, I think just not be afraid to have conversations with people in your family who you disagree with, your friends who you disagree with, not avoid the topics, but again, so much can really be fun. Like, my favorite thing to do in a conversation with someone I disagree with is to find genuine and new ways of asking the same question, and that's why, and I think by asking somebody, why do they believe that? Well, how do you think this is going to work? Like, just finding these ways of saying why and get to the root of their basis. And then you at least have something, exactly where they're coming from. And then maybe you can think of a way to satisfy what they want with another solution. But if you can't even get to the root of what somebody whose mind you're trying to change wants, how are you ever going to change it?
Absolutely. And certainly someone who doesn't feel seen or heard, they're not going to be changing any opinions because you're more in a fight or flight mentality as opposed to a listen and learn mentality. By the way, one superpower for doing that, which you have in spades, is comedy. comedy, there's a phrase in our space, which is it's hard to hate up close, but even further, it's hard to hate someone if you're laughing together too. And so you're putting some really good vibes, out into the universe with comedy. And I'll share just one example. I think for people to hear something concrete might be helpful with this. So the last organization I ran, Millennial Action Project, now called Future Caucus, has these chapters in different states around the country, and it's Democrats, Republicans, independents, young elected officials who have a fresh perspective. And in Mississippi, we had have a chapter, and the legislators at their first happy hour, so a lot of alcohol involved, by the way, in bridge building as well, is they brought up the issue of their flag. The Mississippi state flag has had a Confederate emblem on it, and they felt like maybe we should change this for future generations. And at that time, it was like 2017, they felt like some of the members who were part of this caucus, it's called the Future Caucus, didn't feel like they could move it. It's just too controversial, too radioactive of an issue. But they kept talking, they kept drinking, they kept building relationships, they built genuine friendships through this whole process. Well, you fast forward to 2020, and in the context of the George Floyd and the racial reckoning that we're having in this country, that same group, which had been meeting regularly, working on different issues from workforce to all kinds of issues, they decided to take up this one more time. And within the caucus, they built enough of a consensus, Democrats and Republicans, let's change our state flag. So they voted on it, agreed to it as a caucus. They brought it to the state legislature, passes the state legislature in a very red state. Republicans have a supermajority with roughly about 75% of to 80% of the legislature. And the Republican governor signs it into law. And then the people got to create a new flag that's more emblematic of the future of that state, where young people felt like they could have a stake in their future. And it was good morally. It was good in many other ways. It felt like they would be able to attract more business to the state as well. That to me is what transformative change looks like. This was not like 50+1 people got on board with it. It was 75 to 80%. And I know one of the Republican legislators who's part of our group lost his office probably on that vote. And he felt like that was one of the most important votes he had taken. And so my point being that this went from something that was radioactive, we can't talk about this at all. You keep talking, you keep respecting each other, you continue having those beers, and then the time is right. And all of that comes to a head when you really trust each other and they're able to get this passed. We've seen examples like that all across the country. The question is, do those examples get into the zeitgeist or not? When we pass bipartisan gun violence prevention or climate change legislation, or we pass gerrymandering reform in different states, all with bipartisan support, does that get the attention? Do people tune into that? Or do we choose not to tell those stories? And that's a big part of my calling right now, is to bring those stories to the forefront.
I think, very well said. The first point you're making is that change is in this, again, bringing up the social media thing, a lot of what we're kind of like a bunch of fixers.
Yeah.
A little bit. Because we have this power, I guess, like a social media platform where it's democratized in a way that anybody can say anything. So to a degree, everybody wants to fix the problem or at least sound off on why it's wrong, as opposed to looking at sort of a long-term thing. So I think long-term change and focusing, even not just on this election coming up, but whoever gets in office, it's going to take, like, the engagement needs to continue, and it needs to be pushed whatever side you're on, and having these conversations and not being afraid to talk to people on the other side of the aisle, and therefore not villainizing people on the other side of the aisle, even if they are so far from what you believe. Having a conversation is only going to help and allow them to see your humanity, you to see theirs, and again, find that common ground. And
like I said, and I'd be curious if you have any reflections on this, just the role of comedy. I feel like the way that you've been able to build bridges in a lot of ways, and I'm not just talking about left versus right, I feel like you've built a really powerful bridge between the coasts and the Midwest. There are all kinds, whether it's in New York, DC, or LA, people have their various stereotypes about, the Midwest. And you're able to, in some ways, bring humanity to that through comedy. And I actually think that's really important because right now we have like politics by stereotype. And that I think is helping to drive some of the division right now. But if you can help start a conversation through comedy across all these differences, you can start off on a different foot. And I was just thinking about this the other day, like, the Daily Show, they were trying to find a host, right? And they ultimately kind of go back to Jon Stewart and have this kind of revolving cast. And I think about this in my world with the different commentators and the journalists who have national platforms. We're the people from the Midwest, the people who are like, who can bring that Midwestern voice. And so this is not just my plug for the Daily Show to hire you as a correspondent, which they should do, but on top of that, to be elevating more Midwestern voices.
Well, thank you for the kind words. I think, to your point, comedy, anytime you can make people laugh, you can make people listen. Because, and it's also kind of walking a line and really, there's a lot realizing what are the hills to die on, or what are the things to really go all out for. Like, you want to say something is wrong when something is wrong. But if you say something is wrong and it makes the people who believe that wrong dig in deeper into their thing, then is what you're doing actually effective? It goes back to the silence is violence. But also just blindly saying your opinion that you borrowed from someone else off of social media, that's violence too, so it's like, I think it's twofold. I think one is, if you are in comedy, or I myself in comedy, it's usually trying to think like, most of the show I want to bring people together, and then there may be one or two things where I think this is something we can all agree on, but it's how do you frame it? And the only way you can frame it is by talking to a lot of people that you disagree with, understanding how they can hear it, because I think at the end of the day, we all want the same thing. We do. And I think people on the right are more hesitant to allow government to control their lives, and people on the left are more hesitant to allow big business to control their lives. But what we all can agree on is none of us want to be controlled by like a system, so how can we find ways that maybe are outside of the options that we're getting from politicians and from media outlets, and how can we find more creative ways? It just takes a lot of work on behalf of everybody listening to this podcast now.
It's worth it though, because I grew up in the same area that you grew up here in Brookfield / Elm Grove, in that school district. And there was almost no one who looked like me or shared my background in that school system. And yet we were able to build community together. We were able to build a lot of great things together. And it was really an honor to just officiate the wedding of one of those friends from that, stage of life. And I've reflected on that a lot, because I saw many temptations in those years to just isolate myself. No one here, kind of understands my background, my parents being immigrants from India. And for those who are tuning in who don't know what Brookfield and Elm Grove is, it's when you and I were going to school in those areas, it was
very white.
Yeah, it was like 90. I think I looked it up on Wikipedia once. It was like 98% white in those days. It's diversified a little bit since then. But the point being, though, is could have isolated, but instead was part of a larger whole. Music was a really important reason for that. Honestly, if I didn't have music, I probably would have gone down a different track. But the work that you're describing is worth it, because that story is a microcosm of what America is. The fact that we can be fish out of water in these communities and yet find positive ways to associate with each other. Did I hear things that were insensitive or not the best things, hurled at me growing up? Absolutely. But I didn't think it was with bad intent. It might've been due to lack of exposure. But it was important to be able to build those positive associations. And when you zoom out, America has never been tried before. This experiment in creating a diverse democracy where we come from all these different backgrounds, we look different, and we try and coexist and reconcile our differences through the system of government has never succeeded in the past before. And yet we've been struggling, but doing better than any other previous society has before. And so it's worth it. It is it's a hard thing, like you were saying. But I've just seen too much beauty in the days I had in my formative years growing up here. When I look back on that, I have a smile because of the ideas that we're talking about. So it's definitely worth it.
Well, dude, thank you so much for coming on and for, being somebody to like take your story and transcend it and see how you can kind of take your microcosm and translate it to a larger thing across the country. So appreciate you. And if people want to follow what you're doing, how can they find you?
Yeah, just on social media at Stephen Olikara on X and Instagram and all that good stuff. And then the organization that's working on storytelling to bridge divides, it's called Bridge Entertainment Labs.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much,
Thanks,
man.
Brother.
Appreciate
Great
you.
to see you.
Great to see you too.
Yeah,
you got to
man.
sign the wall now.
Yeah, we'll do. Yeah, I see you got some Packers over there.
Yeah. Put it right next to them. You know, there you go.
We'll do.
All right.
All right.
Thanks, man.
Yeah.
All right, folks. Thank you so much for listening. Colleen, if they want to follow Stephen, where can they go?
Yeah, you can follow Stephen at Stephen Olikara on Instagram and X, and then follow his work at Future Caucus and at Bridge Ent Labs for Bridge Entertainment Labs. Check out everything he's doing at StephenOlikara.com. And then you can find us on all platforms at Cripescast, or for more show information, go to Cripescast.com. That's where we have the merch linked. That's where we have the show dates. That's where we have all of our past guests and everything in between. Just go check it out there. And that's all I got.
Heck yeah. Okay. Well, thank you guys for just listening and, take this conversation and hopefully bring some, love and understanding into the world, as corny as that sounds. But if people feel like you're listening to them, they'll be more likely to listen to you. So if you're not going to do it for love, do it for selfish reasons. Just whatever you do, don't act like some of our leaders in this world, because they're not really leaders. So just follow your own internal compass. You know what's right, and you can see what's clearly wrong. So God bless you all, and to all a good night. Merry Christmas.
I thought you were going to say, if it's not for love, do it for self-love.
That too. Have a great 4th, everyone. We'll see you next week.
So roll out the barrel and get the band brewing. Life's got you down, just keep her moving. It's on Wisconsin, the Badgers say it's the old Wisconsin Jubilee.
You know, sometimes when you're ice fishing, you put your foot in the walleye hole and go ass over tea kettle and you think you're done. No, you gotta keep her moving.